That's just what I want.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Possibly even good morning, depending on where you are. I am Matt Ingenthron from Couchbase, and with me this afternoon is, at least it's afternoon for us here in lovely Mountain View, Will Gardella. It so happens that Will's in a totally different part of the Couchbase office, so we just decided to do this hangout from a couple different places for you guys. So before I begin, I want to just say thanks to everyone for joining. We do have a few things that Will and I have kind of talked about ahead of time to go through. So Will, welcome very much. I think this is your first hangout, right?
This is my first hangout. I'm relatively new to the Couchbase family, so thank you, Matt, and thanks to the audience for joining us. Yeah, I actually came to Couchbase from HP, where I was in their big data team, and before that I was at SAP in the HANA group and in the big data organization there. So I'm familiar with big data, although Couchbase is a really different kind of solution from what I'm used to. So the technology cleverness is really kind of different. It's got some really different elements there. So I'm definitely excited to be here talking about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been an interesting couple of years. Things are going far faster and more real time, and definitely that's kind of our sweet spot. So Will, you're part of the product management team, right?
That's correct. I'm a product manager. I tend to focus more on the big data pieces of the product right now. So, well, when I say big data, I should say more the integration parts, right? So, yeah. How does it work with Hadoop? How does it work with Spark? How does it work with Kafka? Elasticsearch, Solar, the areas where we get into, which we'll talk about more in a minute, but the other kinds of integrations into the product, like now that we have Nickel, and you can use these SQL-related products, what does that look like? And also I've been working on the full text search recently, so I've been working with that native full text that we have in Couchbase that's still in the preview mode.
Yeah, we should probably do a hangout on Levy and CBFT in the not too distant future.
Definitely, because that's all really different than, I mean, it's very much the same and it leverages the same infrastructure, but a lot of the stuff that's clever in there is quite different than what people are used to who have seen the more traditional Couchbase.
Yeah, absolutely. So today, what we wanted to do, because we're kind of kicking off this hangout series where we're going to go into the different pieces of 4.0, which is currently in beta. And we've got a couple of cool things to talk about with the 4.0 beta. So yeah, for folks who maybe haven't had a lot of time to pay attention to everything we're doing at Couchbase, haven't gotten a look recently, what's sort of a quick overview of 4.0? Is it just Nickel, or what else is in there? Maybe you can give us a quick overview.
So if people really haven't had a chance to look at it so far, it's more than Nickel. So whoops, excuse me. That was interesting. So it's more than just Nickel, but just to say what Nickel is briefly in a nutshell. So Nickel is the SQL for documents that we have added, and it's been going along, developing alongside of Couchbase since the 2.5 time frame. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't really completely integrated in until the 4.0 release. No. And so this gives you the ability to use SQL against your JSON documents that are in Couchbase. And so that's definitely a big thing. It gives you a new way of querying. So to put that into context, before Couchbase was the key value operation, so you would need to know the key that you were trying to operate on, or you could build a MapReduce view, which was available, and you could use that to query. But now Nickel is a completely different way of querying. So that's pretty exciting. But it also has other things, like there's the global secondary indexes, and that's a big deal. So that's another way of indexing your data, and it has some pretty cool things about it. So the GSI, so when you use the MapReduce views, that gives you a kind of index. Where you can go through and it gives you other ways of looking up your documents rather than just direct access by key. And this is kind of new to me, right? I said I was coming in from the outside, so I've looked at this quite a bit, because when I first saw the views, I was trying to understand what it's all about. GSI is another way of creating indexes that's much more similar to what I think a lot of people are going to be used to from the relational world. And it's kind of interesting. It's a system, and we can talk a little bit more about this, but it's a system where you can create indexes using the nickel syntax, and these indexes can be partitioned across nodes differently. If you think about, this is a little implementation detail, but if you think about what's going on with the views, those views are indexing the data that's on the same node. If you think about GSI, it's indexing across all of the data that you have in your cluster, but it can be bringing that index onto a single node. And for some queries, that can make a huge difference to how fast that query can be answered. So in other words, you don't have to be going out to all the nodes and doing kind of a scatter-gather kind of thing. You can, with secondary indexes, you can be doing you can be satisfying the query from that one index on a single node. And so that's pretty exciting. That can make a big difference in reducing the complexity that has to be executed for satisfying certain queries. So we're pretty excited about that. And I think that's going to get a lot of people really happy with what's coming out. So there's the nickel, there's the GSI, there's something called MDS, which is new in the 4.0 line.
What does that stand for?
Yeah, so MDS. It is multi-dimensional scaling.
Yeah.
And so so now that I just mentioned, you've got query and you've got indexes, these global indexes, and of course you still have the data nodes, which if you're a Couchbase diehard, you know that because that's the core service there.
Yeah.
That stores your data. So you got those three services. Well, what you can do now in the 4.0 frame is you can actually grow those things separately. So, and this is a little bit weird, right? Because Couchbase has always been really known for being super simple to administer. And so what we were careful to do when we did MDS was we didn't want to give up the simplicity, right? So you can still scale Couchbase by just clunking more nodes in there. It's still the same software in every node, right? You're not doing a different image on each node. What you're doing is you still grow the node however you want. And if you don't want to do anything new, if you don't like MDS, you don't have to use MDS. You can still just add nodes to scale. But what's new with MDS is that if you want to specialize servers for certain workloads, you can do that. So now you can have data nodes, and you can have index nodes, and you can have query nodes, and they can be separate. And the way you achieve that is just by turning off or turning on the services on those nodes that you want. And so what that allows you to do, it's a couple things that make it kind of interesting. One thing you can do is, indexing and querying might be more CPU intensive and might be they might benefit from having more RAM on that particular machine, or they might be more CPU or IO intensive. And so you can actually scale up on those machines that if you want to put the query or the indexing loads on certain machines, you can actually use a bigger machine for those workloads, and so that's pretty cool because, like for example, with indexing, sometimes what you really want is to have that index to be able to cover the full data set on that machine, and so that gives you extra flexibility. Maybe your indexes are going to grow, and you want to just put a beefier machine in. You can do that. The other thing that's kind of cool about MDS is that you can sort of mix and match. So if you want to have like a very large bunch of query boxes, it doesn't have to be a single query node or a single index node. You can put a number of them in. And so you can grow your cluster differently depending on how your workloads are panning out in real life, right? You can look at it and say, I don't need any more query nodes, but the indexes are getting slammed. I'm just going to throw another index in there, or I want to have a backup copy of this index somewhere on a separate node or whatever. So it gives you additional flexibility that you didn't used to be able to do. And so that's pretty cool stuff.
So is it fair to say that if I, as an app developer, maybe at development time, I don't, I'm depending on what I'm trying to do, up front, I might not know how much I'm going to have, it's going to be intense on index usage or how much I need. And then the cool thing is that even while the systems, after I develop and I do some load testing, I can say, oh, okay, now I know I need this amount of index capacity, and I can either service it with my existing KV, or maybe I want to go dedicate some resources to it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's a good point, Matt, because one of the things that people, one of the things that we think about here at Couchbase a lot is the app developer shouldn't have to think ahead to, be changing their application all the time if the topology changes, things like that, right? So that's stuff that we care about deeply. So we tried to keep that in the product so that we would not have to make the app developer think ahead to what they were going to need, right? When you talk about a system like Couchbase that's, usually it's servicing an operational kind of load, right? So it's a live database. It's got to be low latency, all this stuff. In order to, to really make that kind of a thing that it can't go down, right? It has to be up live and it has to get new deployments all the time. So for app developers to stay productive in that environment, they shouldn't have to be required to deal with changes in topology or things like we're talking about here, where the administrator might look at it and say, we need to add a query node or something like that. The app developer shouldn't have to do anything. They should just get the benefits of that extra hardware going into the cluster. So that's kind of the way that MDS works.
Cool. So, and by the way, is there anything that maybe people haven't even paid attention to since 3.0 that we might mention?
So there's some new features in the actually, one of the things I wanted to mention was the security. There's a couple of security things that have come up too, which for some audiences is a big deal.
Yes.
So now there's LDAP integration in there. There is an access logging that you can see who's done what activities in the administrator accounts, which is, for a lot of regulated industries, that's just, you have to have that in order to be able to use Couchbase. So for a lot of customers, that's a kind of a long asked for feature. Did we talk about XCCR and DCP and the new stuff in there?
No, we haven't recently.
Yeah, so XCCR is quite a cool thing.
And what does that stand for? I'm going to drill in on all the...
I haven't been here that long, but I'm all down with the 3-letter acronyms already.
TLAs. Yeah. Well, XCCR is a FLA.
So let me just talk about DCP for a second, because DCP is the database change protocol.
Sure.
So what that does is it's watching the mutation. So when a piece of data changes, or you write a new piece of data in, that's something that Couchbase is going to be able to, it knows that that's more significant than the data that's not changing, right? Yeah. So that DCP is what Couchbase uses internally to communicate the changes around, so that different nodes can keep in touch. So for example, Couchbase is really based on replication. You need to have multiple copies of the data. And if the active copy, something happens to that active copy, then you need to be able to switch over to the replicas and have those take over. And so Couchbase does that using DCP. And DCP is very clever and kind of very efficient way of doing that, and that I mentioned only looks at the changes. I mean, it does all kinds of other clever stuff. But one of the other things that we do with DCP is we use that for the cross data center replication. So that's what XDCR stands for. So if you think about this in the big sense, XDCR, so DCP, when it's used for replication, it's inside of a single cluster. And it's copying around inside the cluster, but you still have, that's just one cluster. If you want to replicate to a completely, potentially independent cluster, an autonomous cluster, a complete cluster, then you need to use something like XDCR, and that will communicate the changes between those two clusters. And so that way you can have two completely independent clusters, and that allows you to, of course, survive bigger failures. So for example, if you're worried about having your data center go down, because somebody unplugs it, or PG&E cuts your line or something like that, the power company cuts your line, that helps you replicate to a different, either set of completely different hardware, or maybe even a completely different data center. And you can also use that for geographic replication, which is I shouldn't use the word replication, but geographic distribution.
Yes.
So you want to have a data center in, let's say, the west coast of the United States, the east coast of the United States, Europe, and one in Asia, and you can use DCP or XDCR to move that data around. One of the things we have that's new with XDCR is filtering. Yeah, yeah, I know I just gave you a long XDCR, but XDCR is very cool, so I have to.
Well, no, but filtering sounds like it'd be useful, right, for those situations where maybe you don't want all the data everywhere all the time, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So this was a much asked for feature.
Yeah.
And so just to put a little finer point on what I was just saying, let's say your geographic distribution, you have one region that is cheaper to operate in, and you want to keep everything in there. You got another region that maybe is more expensive to operate in, and you only have that as an emergency kind of thing, and you don't serve a lot of traffic out of it. So maybe you don't need to put everything in there. Yep. Or maybe not everything needs to replicate to every area because you can recreate it, or it's only good for 24 hours or whatever it is, because people store all kinds of information in Couchbase, right?
Yeah.
So you might want to just take the certain stuff, and now with XDCR, with filtering, that's something that you can do. And so that's kind of a big deal, and it can save people a lot of money because it just cuts down the traffic and it cuts down the load. And it can also keep the data centers replicating more in sync because they're sending less information, just the good stuff. So there are a lot of reasons why people have wanted this, and I think they're going to be pretty happy with the XDCR plus filtering.
Cool. So just shifting gears here a little bit, because we've been talking about, we did a 4.0 DP. What's actually new in 4.0 beta? Is there anything specific to beta that people couldn't do with the DP previously?
Well, one biggie, so the DP to beta. One biggie, obviously, is that we fixed just a ton of bugs. A lot of the bugs, the focus was really on trying to get these tricky stability kind of bugs, the kind of stuff that people want to see when they're going to go live, right?
Yeah.
So some of those things can take a while to root out. So that was a big focus. A couple thousand bugs, I think, were fixed. Not all of them stability bugs, all kinds of things, but a lot of that stuff that we went after was stuff that users had told us about who were trying out. The developer preview, we got a lot of good feedback in there, and some of the early customers who were trying it out. And so we tried to address as many of those as we could, and I think we've done a pretty good job. We still, of course, have some additional ones, but that's one. And the other thing is that the DP was single node, right? So the developer preview, sorry, using acronyms again, but the developer preview is single node. So things like XDCR that we just talked about, MDS, the multi-dimensional scaling, you couldn't do those in that frame. So for people who want to try that out, they can do that with the beta. The spatial indexes weren't in there, so if you know what the spatial indexes are, I guess that's a question for the audience. I know you know what they are. But the spatial indexes allow you to do sort of multi-dimensional indexes. They have a different underlying representation. And so those guys can help you answer. They have the word spatial, but they can actually be useful for purely numerical type of queries. Like you want to know, like income. You want to build an index of income versus age versus average annual spend on your site, or something like that. And you can use that spatial index to build that multi-dimensional table to help you answer questions like that.
Got it.
And help you answer them faster.
So that's the so-called n-dimensional index that you can apply to spatial kinds of things, like go tell me all the things that match this around this within this bounding box, but you can turn it into so many different use cases. I remember seeing one where it was being used for as sort of a words with friends like game. So they were actually indexing that sort of thing.
I mean, you can also do interesting things, like if you have your geo coordinates in the system, you can add additional dimensions that are numeric. So like you can put together a two-dimensional coordinate map, and on the points on that map can be like dollar amounts or something like that, average income. And so you can do all kinds of clever things with it. But that's probably a good topic for another Hangout.
Yeah.
Put in on that.
So let me jump back to Nickel here, because that's obviously the big feature. I mean, lots of people are super excited about that. So if I'm a developer and maybe I'm looking for like a new system of record for my app that's storing JSON, maybe I wrote the front end in AngularJS or React.js, or maybe it's a mobile app, right? And so on the mobile app, I'm talking to a REST service that I've developed already. So that's probably JSON already. How will Nickel make things easier for me? How will it make my life different?
Well, we haven't really talked about Nickel so much, but Nickel's pretty cool. I mean, it's a SQL language. So I usually say it's a SQL dialect. I mean, it really is. It's going to be very familiar to any developer who knows SQL, which is pretty much all developers. And that's one of the reasons we went there. So it works on JSON documents. When we say document in Couchbase, we're talking about you store a JSON document under a key. And that's really super convenient if you're a developer who's working in JSON. For most guys who are doing things on the web, guys or girls who are doing things on the web, you probably are dealing with libraries that serialize it easily. You can dump it out and just consume it directly in your views, or I shouldn't use the word views here at Couchbase, but in your web applications, and it's just really, really convenient. You know, there are lots of libraries that work with it. Everyone can serialize and deserialize it fast, and so it's great. On the Nickel side, when you're doing queries against these things, people understand SQL, and it's nice because it's very expressive language. If you compare that with working in the key value, you might find that Nickel gives you just a little bit more expressive power to be able to say, it's more declarative, so you can say what you want to do instead of having to describe how you want to do it. And so that can be quite convenient, and you still have the flexibility. You can write different JSON documents. You don't have to conform to a schema or anything like that. The schema basically is defined by what you're doing in your application. So in that way, you're not giving up anything for that side. And then Nickel has some, and so if we talk about what Nickel has from the SQL perspective, it's going to be most of the things that you're expecting there, like selects, the DML statements for updates and insert and delete and so forth. Those are still experimental right now. They're in there, but they're experimental. But what's really cool is that you have joins. So from a relational perspective, I mean, it opens up a lot of different ways to model your data now. You don't have to just be completely denormalized. Not that you ever did, but it gives you more options to join on the server side, or you can still do what we used to call the client-side joins, where you're doing it in the client. So it just gives you more options. And then the other thing is that Nickel has extensions that work with JSON. So you can do things like there are commands that there's a thing called missing. So for example, if I'm doing an application where I'm developing my own version of Amazon, I have a huge product catalog maybe, but I don't need to have unnecessary attributes stored. So if I have a printer and it has is this duplex or whatever, if that's an attribute of my printers, I don't have to also have that attribute on my computers where it doesn't make any sense, right? Because I'm not trying to conform to a schema, and I don't have to have 1,000 different schemas. But I can use a Nickel statement where I check to see if the attribute is missing or not, and that gives me a nice declarative way to get the behavior I want out of the system. And so that's one thing. Another example would be nest and unnest. So you can use those things to basically pull the if you have a document that has an embedded structure in it, like maybe it's got an array or even a multi-dimensional array, you can use something like unnest to say, I want you to pull that array up to the to the top level of my results, and or you can nest it. You can put in arrays to results that you want to return to an application, so that the web application can be super simple. It just iterates over the elements of an array. Even though originally what's coming back from the query might be something that's tricky, multidimensional, or whatever, you can simplify it out. So it's really convenient in a lot of ways, and it's got some other clever stuff, but I'll I'll keep talking for a long time if I go on about that.
Yeah, actually, I think in a couple weeks we're going to do a hangout with some folks who are straight from the Nickel team. So we're going to reach into engineering and get some other folks into a hangout. So for those who are paying attention to the series, there's your opportunity.
Yeah, Nickel is really interesting. There's quite a lot of deep theoretical stuff going on there too. There's one other thing I wanted to mention about Nickel, which is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so people in the analytics world, which is I'm more from that side of the house in my background. People there are, you know, you can have MySQL when you pry it from my cold dead hands, right? People use that thing. They use SQL for everything they can, and you know, we saw the same evolution with people really wanting to have SQL in the NoSQL world, and that side of the house as well, with things like Hadoop developing Hive way back when, and Hive taking on so much of an important role. Because it's just simple, it's declarative, and it's used by all these tools, right? That's the other part we haven't mentioned. But with Nickel and using driver, we also have now an ODBC driver, JDBC driver out with Simba.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
That people can try out. So you can of course develop against it directly if you want to write Java or ODBC programs. You can do that, program against those interfaces. But you can also use it with all kinds of tools. So this is like analytics tools, like your Tableau. You can use it with Excel. You can use it with stuff like Power BI. You can use it with MicroStrategy. It's pretty much all the guys. SAP Lumira for my old employers, right? All these things, right? You can use that to connect up. So that's a big deal because you couldn't do that before. And then the other thing you can do is also like the ETL tools and the data integration tools, things like Informatica.
Yeah.
So if you use those things to shuttle data around inside your enterprise, you can also use those things against Couchbase using that Simba driver. So that's also very cool. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah. So you know, certainly more tools in the tool belt, so to speak, for developers. Or actually, at this level, you're really talking about the overall system architecture.
Yeah, I think it lets other people use Couchbase who couldn't directly use it before. So it opens it up to just a different kind of audience, and I think that's going to be interesting.
Well, yeah, I always go back to that phrase, polyglot persistence, right? A polyglot is somebody who speaks lots of languages. Here in this modern era, it's not like data is mastered in one place. It's not like it was in the past where, you know, everything went into one database and there's your ODS, your operational data store, stick everything in there.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple things about connectors and so forth. Now I know, you know, Hadoop and NoSQL aren't really the same things, but they're kind of under the same tent, so to speak, or maybe in the same ballpark. So how do those things kind of come together? I know your area of expertise in particular is really into some of that big data. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how Couchbase plugs in there.
Yeah. So this is definitely a question that's close to my heart. I was thinking about this a lot when I wanted to change to a new company, because I was looking for a place like Couchbase, really. And so here's what's different about it. A lot of when people say big data, they mean all kinds of different things, and there are different kinds of big data solutions out there. Couchbase is really a kind of big data solution, in the sense that it can run very large sites, very large web applications. So this is Internet of Things, your traditional web applications and mobile applications. And Couchbase is designed to serve as a backend system for those systems with very low latency to satisfy the queries and very predictable performance. And so this is kind of different. So when people think of big data, half the time or more than half the time, they immediately think Hadoop, or maybe nowadays they think Spark. And those are definitely systems that people need, and they use them with Couchbase. But they don't use them instead of Couchbase. They use them, beside Couchbase, because they really serve different kinds of purposes. Generally, those systems are analytical, or they're used for machine learning. What we see with Couchbase is it's more on the operational side. It's more it's the thing that's providing that quick response behind, me going to my phone and pressing on the buy button on eBay or something like that, right? That has to be super fast, because if it isn't super fast is, let's say, under a millisecond, right?
Yeah.
If it's not super fast, then that customer might not buy, and then it costs me money.
Yeah.
And so that's really what we're specialized for solving. And we, for us, low latency is, if it took a second, that's not low latency. That's slow.
Yeah.
So we don't want to go there. We want to stay fast, and maybe our top sizes are not in the area that, if you look at the overall volumes of data, we're not in the same ballpark as a Hadoop system. And we're, that yet again, we don't really need to. So we kind of interoperate with those things. We have connectors that work with Hadoop and Spark and Kafka and so forth. I could say one more thing about the difference between a Couchbase and a Hadoop and a Spark. So if you think about who the users are who are connecting to those systems, how many simultaneous users you have connecting into the systems, the Couchbase may have millions of users.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, there might be, let's say 100 analysts who are working, or data scientists working against a Spark cluster or a Hadoop cluster at any time. You're generally not dealing with millions of users at a time. They're not really designed for that kind of thing. And then, of course, Spark doesn't have the persistence underneath it, right? It runs with other things, but that's just a rule of thumb way. So, I could give you an update on what's new in the connectors, if that makes sense for this audience, you think?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what have we shipped most recently? Maybe just give us the quick rundown.
So there are developer previews of most of these things out there now. And we expect the GAs to be coming about the same time we expect the GAs to come for the GA to come for Couchbase Server 4. And so the Kafka, there was a release at the end of July. So what Kafka does, for people who don't know, Kafka is like
that's like today, isn't it? You said end of July.
Yeah, it's July 28th. So that was I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could use normal words.
It's okay.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. That has the ability for resuming streams. But what Kafka does, in case people don't know, Kafka is like a message broker that sits, and it's like a heavy-duty message broker, right? It's not for running your application necessarily. It's for shipping massive amounts of data all through your enterprise, right? And you probably are using it to ship all kinds of data, but and I'm not going to go into what it is if you don't know. But it basically, what we've just released improves the ability to. It makes it more efficient for Couchbase moves data in and out more efficiently, and it also has better ability to resume streams of data that are coming in and out. And then what we expect with the next release is some additional optimizations that will just make it more robust and help with rebalancing and so forth when Kafka is involved in that mix. Just make the cluster behave better. So that's the Kafka front. Spark is something I know a lot of people are excited about.
Yeah. It's electrifying.
Yes, it's electrifying. Exactly. That was a terrible pun.
Sorry.
There's our audience there, Matt. That should be bad. But they are techie, so I don't know. A lot of techie guys and bad puns go well.
Yeah, that's humor. Sorry.
So the Spark connector is in a DP2. It's a second developer preview now. And it's got pretty darn good coverage now of most of what people would want to do with Spark. So you can create RDDs from documents, from views, and from nickel queries. So that's pretty much anything. Yeah, anything you can do that would give you a query in Couchbase, you can now use that to create an RDD, which you can operate on in Spark.
Yep.
And you can also write RDDs and D streams into Couchbase. So as I was saying before, Spark doesn't itself have the persistence. So it's usually writing data to some system. You can write that data to Couchbase. So that's very cool. The cluster and bucket management is completely transparent. So that's nice. You can direct access things if you want to, but you don't have to. It can be very smooth. So that's sort of the Spark core operations, but you can also do Spark SQL. And the Spark streaming is now available in this developer preview too.
Yep.
And it will be, it's planned for, I shouldn't say it will be, but it's planned for GA with the next release, with the GA release of the Spark connector. That should also have the Spark streaming. So if you're interested in that, you can try that out now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that I know a lot of people are interested in the Solar Elasticsearch plugins. And our Elasticsearch plugin is going to, the big thing, it has a lot of stability enhancements. It has some new configuration, but the big thing that's coming out is with this next release, so it's available in preview right now, but with the next release, it supports up to the latest Elasticsearch version, 1.5.2, and of course it supports Couchbase 4 with that version. So it'll go from 4 back to 2.5, I believe. So that's all coming out there.
Nice. So, kind of switching from that, going back to the rest of that, right? Because the connectors and so forth are obviously part of how people develop with Couchbase. So that's also true, of course, of the languages that people use, the SDK. So what's new in from a developer perspective here with 4.0 in the 4.0 beta timeframe?
Well, actually, that's a good point, a good question, because with this one, all the SDKs now will have support for nickel.
Oh, okay.
So that's definitely new. So I don't know if everyone who's on the Hangout knows this, but with Couchbase, there are SDKs that we have that go with different languages, right? So there's Java SDK, a .NET SDK, and the way those things work, it's sort of like it tries to follow the idiom that the developers would expect to use. So Java doesn't look like .NET and doesn't look like C, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a cool thing. And so there's always been a way to use those to develop against Couchbase, but the nickel support is something that's really new in there. Mm-hmm. And so I think people are going to really like to play around with all that and see how it goes. There's also a new Go SDK, mm-hmm. Which was just released, and I heard good things about that at GopherCon. I think people really liked that. If anyone's on who's a Go person, we'd definitely be interested in them trying it out and telling us their feedback. We use Go a lot inside of Couchbase, and so I'm kind of curious to see, what kind of adoption that one gets. And I know there are a lot of big shops that are using Go these days, so kind of curious to see what happens with that.
By the way, from the audience, if the audience have any questions, there's a Q&A little UI element somewhere in the Hangout. For me, it's on the left-hand side. Maybe it's on your left-hand side too. If you'd like to ask a question of myself or Will, by all means, go click on that thing, and then you can ask us a question there live, and I'll read those questions off. Just kind of going back to beta here while we wait for some questions. So betas, so we're currently in beta with 4.0. So part of the reason we do a beta is for people to be able to kind of participate and get their own sense of what's good and bad and give us feedback. Like I said, we love all the feedback. And we always do our best to react to all of it. So how can people participate? What can they do to help us with beta?
Well, definitely, the obvious thing is download it and try it out. You can definitely help us that way. We're interested in all kinds of things about how people use it, how they think it should work. We try to do a lot of things here to test, for example. Mm-hmm. But until it gets into the wild, you don't know how people are going to use it. We do some clever stuff around random query generation and to verify correctness and all sorts of stuff. But it's still, you'd be surprised what kind of stuff people figure out. And sometimes it's just a quick case of inside the walls here, we think about things in one way, and then the other users think about it in a different way. And so it's kind of cool to just, get that feedback where people say, you know what, it would be really cool if you did it this way. And we were like, yeah, you know what, that's right. That would be cool. Why didn't we think of that?
Yeah.
The one thing that's kind of cool is that we've been doing a lot of stuff with different cloud providers recently. So, we have partnerships with like Docker and Amazon and Azure, and it seems like I'm forgetting some obvious ones, but Joyent is one of our partners, and they've been really pretty cool. So Joyent does a lot of this bare metal kind of virtualization is not the right word. What's the word I'm looking for?
Containerizing, I guess, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Containers are the
containers are the hotness.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they do that, and they've actually launched this contest, which I would definitely direct people to check it out. It's a contest that you can. There's a blog post about it. Maybe I should look that up in a second here, but I can't think and talk at the same, or I can't look it up and think at the same time. But they've released a coding contest, so it's kind of like the coolest nickel application is what they're looking for. And Joyent is collaborating with them, so you can go check that out. They make it really easy to try out Couchbase, and then you can build something on those containers, and then you can submit it. It'll get judged by some of the guys around here, and we have some other judges, and there's some prizes involved and other stuff like that. But it's a great way to get your hands on. I should probably not gloss over the prizes. They're fabulous prizes, but it's a fun way to get your hands on it and just try it out and I think for me there's nothing that works as well as just trying to build simple applications. Oh, I forgot to mention this too. This is another thing that a lot of people would be interested in. In the latest in the beta, there's now a much more extensive sample application. It's a travel sample app, and so that thing is great because you can go in there and it's got a fully functional application. You can easily set it up, and then you can kind of dive right into the code. You can see how people actually develop real applications. And you were asking before, what kind of JSON features are people gonna see? I use the word guys to mean anybody, but I know not everyone uses that general
people. Got it.
Gender neutral term, but guys and girls can go in there and check out the way that the actual application works and how it solves various challenges. And it does use some of these features I was telling you about before that are these clever things that help you deal with JSON inputs. So like nest and unnest, you can go look at code samples in there and see how they actually built that application. So it's very cool.
Yeah, I went and pulled the URL up, so here you go. The Nickel Challenge.
Nickel Challenge, yes, thank you.
It's actually on a blog from a colleague of yours, from Don Pinto. And so I think what they're doing there is there's Triton, which is Joyent's service, and they've contributed a prize, and then Simba have also contributed a prize, if I recall correctly. So for the best use of those apps, so there's a challenge there to go find, go show us how you can use Nickel the best in your given application. Yeah,
that's right, and they're also contributing judges too.
Okay. So they're judging. So Kyle. Judging on your use of Simba and so.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, Will, I want to thank you very much for joining us today and for doing the Hangout. I want to thank everyone for looking in on the broadcast. So we're gonna in a couple weeks' time. I believe the next Hangout is actually, if I recall correctly, I think it is actually about Nickel. So in about 2 weeks' time, we'll have another Hangout. There are plenty of opportunities. Just hit couchbase.com/download to download the 4.0 beta and try it out. In the past, that was actually it was a little harder to find when we were in developer preview. Beta, we now have the full set of things, as Will was mentioning, so it's a good opportunity. And I think that's about it. So thanks everyone for joining. Unless there are any questions, I'll give it just a moment to see if any questions pop up. No. Thanks, Will. I'll post some URLs for everyone, and look forward to seeing you on the next Hangout.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Will. Bye.
Bye.